everybody, it's Kirsty. You know me, I solve crimes using astrology. Today I thought we would have a deep dive into Letecia Stauch'S, her natal chart, specifically aspects between the planets, because we don't have an exact time of birth, but we can look at the aspects between the planets. Now, in no way does this excuse any actions that she may have done, allegedly. It does help to explain dynamics in somebody's life as to what leads them to a point that they get to, as she did, doing what she did. So we're going to have a look at the aspects, these in particular to start with. And I've got a really good book that I'm actually going to use this time instead of my own reading. I'll put some in, but this book is especially good. Astrological Insights into the Personality, and it really goes into quite deep family dynamics, in-depth psychology and reasons why we do the things we do. And our natal charts do show these tendencies. Now, there are obviously things that can be done to offset the problematic aspects that we have in our chart, but a lot of the time people just don't. And also transits occur that trigger off specific things in the natal chart, which then causes a chain of events, which then causes things like what happened. So anyway, I won't carry on. We will have a look at Letecia Stauch'S natal chart in depth, back into her childhood, and see if we can figure out if her blueprint shows us why she did what she did. Firstly, we're going to have a quick look at a part of a reading I've done previously but haven't put up on video, which will then go into the deep dive of Letecia. This is Gannon and Letecia's chart together. This chart is Gannon's natal chart on the inside, and Letecia's natal chart on the outside. There's a few areas of interest just between their natal charts, and that is her Saturn and Pluto, which are conjunct Gannon's Mars, and that's in the 12th house, and is Mercury in the 12th house. I'd say that Gannon is a bit of an unknown quantity to her, and this also shows as well that there's authority issues with her and him. She wants to be the person in authority, and perhaps it's that she wasn't allowed to discipline Gannon in the way that she would have disciplined Harley, because Al had his own methods or ways of doing things. So I would imagine that this probably didn't help. Now, her Neptune, which is the crazy juice that she runs on, is conjunct Gannon's Pluto. So if he does anything to change her self-worth, see, her Neptune is in his second house. So how she appears and how she feels and how worthy she feels is directly in line with the changes that occur in Gannon and Lena's life throughout moving or whatever. So again, that's another way of saying Al loves his kid. Any type of hard situation would make her feel uneasy because she doesn't know how to handle it, and she likes to have full control over things. And if it then makes her look weak in any way, she's not having a part of that at all. Now, her moon in Gemini sits in Gannon's 8th house of death. Her moon is making a square to Saturn, which is our deceased body. So it seems that she really had no qualms in doing what she did, because there's all this authority issue. There's all of this thing that Gannon is getting between her and Al, and that perhaps she feels or felt as though he rules the roost. He gets to do what he wants to do, and his dad just loves him to bits, which is just awesome and beautiful. But she wants control. Letecia wants control. She wants to have her say, and she doesn't want Gannon to get in the way of her and Al. Now, Gannon has his sun and moon conjunct in his natal chart, so that's his mum and dad. That's them being united together. So it's sort of interesting to see that this actually, in fact, makes an aspect to Letecia's moon. So through the actions of what happened with Letecia's dynamics with her and Gannon, which then ultimately resulted in his death, this has brought back Al and Gannon's mum together. The first aspect I want to talk about is Mars, which is this one here. This may be a bit easier to see. Mars at 23 degrees of Cancer is squaring, so that's 90 degrees, Pluto and Saturn. So first of all, we're going to have a look at what the square represents. And then we're going to see how Mars and Pluto in a square, and how Mars and Saturn in a square play out in the natal chart. As you can see here, this is just a little major aspect chart thingy bobby. There's the 90 degrees, a square. It says here a 6-degree deviation is allowed. They're talking about orbs, and that's a whole nother thing. So we're talking about the square. Traditionally, squares create restrictions and obstacles, and the two planets push each other to work hard to integrate with each other. Now, I work a little differently, and I do definitely see squares as being challenging, especially when you have two malefic planets like Mars and Pluto. Malefic means bad energy, basically. A lot of the time, a square can push two planets to work well together. In synastry, when two people are in love, their suns may be squared each other because they push each other to get better and to grow. The book that I have, The Meaning of Mars Square Pluto, says this: this is a difficult energy level that needs to be channeled and understood before it becomes productive. A square indicates that the planets involved in the aspect are working against each other. Now, I don't necessarily agree, but that's what this book says. In this case, it indicates that Mars, which is I act, works against Pluto, which is my unconscious motivation. It signifies a person who takes action that may be spurred by negative input from the psyche, or a person whose need for control works against his or her ability to take action, which makes a lot of sense. Anger may be confused with sexuality when this aspect is present. The individual may use sex to control other people. The Pluto-Mars square requires an individual requires that an individual control the action taken, and when his universe crumbles, anger takes over. Blind rages can surge up from the unconscious. Because the rage can be so intense, those who own this aspect are aware that they have it, and are usually afraid of their own anger. They may not be willing to admit that the anger exists, for these are often people who implode. They push the anger far down into the depths of the personal unconscious because they're afraid of expressing it. People born in fire or air signs, like Letecia, she was born in Leo, in a fire sign, usually suppress this aspect, for anger is not considered a spiritual development. People who have attempted some form of spiritual development don't want to admit having this anger because they're not proud of it, basically. In order for this aspect to become productively creative, the anger has to become conscious and channeled into other directions. This person needs to be aware of the plutonic sensitive points, which was triggered in the event Pluto, so the anger can be consciously let go. Anger usually manifests when we are either afraid of something or our feelings are hurt. When the fears and hurts are understood, we no longer feel the need to be angry. So she wasn't living up to the higher level of that aspect. The anger was rage, and it was pushed down and pushed down and pushed down. And there's a reason for that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It stems from her childhood, I believe. That's Mars and Pluto. It's an extremely angry aspect. So now we're going to talk about Mars again. I'm going over the top of it now. But in a square, so this same red line, to Saturn. Okay, not Pluto. It was Pluto before, and now it's Saturn. So now we're looking at the relationship between these two. So we have the anger with Mars and Pluto, and now we'll see what we have with Mars and Saturn. Mars-Saturn square. The I act principle, which is Mars, conflicts with the I take seriously principle, or the father, which is Saturn. The father's influence on this individual's psyche built an atmosphere of mistrust or fear. He did not encourage this individual's actions. Authority seems to be the thing in the way of personal action. The person often feels that all authority figures, dads, teachers, bosses, and men in general, are against whatever they may be trying to do. As an employee, he can appear as a subservient type, for he may develop a strong anti-authority complex. The aspect can indicate a rebel, someone who works to change the status quo. The energy has to be directed, for action must be taken from the constructive point. As a youth, this person may be so negative to authority figures that he or she cuts off her nose to spite her face. So that's very interesting to me, because as we've been able to see through the affidavit, and I'm going to show you some of an interpretation of her chart and some charts that I did, I truly believe she has a major issue with men, and I think that it stems with her father, then stepfather. It goes on, the sexuality comes into it, which turns into the men, the husbands and the partners, and then a male child came into her life, got in the way of everything, and that caused big problems. So I think you'll see another insert in here where I explain that further in detail. This is interesting in regard to her Google searches and feeling sexy to her husband and etc. As far as sexuality is concerned, there's a seriousness to it that is unwarranted. So sexuality to her is very serious. It's a serious thing, where most people it's not that serious. Self-imposed restrictions on sexuality are the result of a subconscious fear caused by the father early in life. The original sexual restriction has something to do with the father and his influence on a small child. Sometimes analysis can help to get to the root of the problems. Sometimes self-diagnosis can do it. At any rate, this aspect indicates serious people, once they make an emotional or sexual commitment, they mean it. That shows even more so the issue with authority, and then it adds in the dynamic of how she doesn't feel wanted and sexually attracted by her husband, and then the jealousy comes into it, which is Mars related as well. The jealousy comes in with other women, which is Al's wife, or Gannon's mother. So there's definitely a father, stepfather, husband, male, then to stepson issue that's happened from childhood. So the next things we're going to look at are the conjunctions in Letecia's natal chart. We have a conjunction of Mercury at 4 degrees of Virgo to Venus at 9 degrees. So that's a 5-degree deviation or orb. Pluto and Saturn are conjunct at 26 and 28 degrees. Jupiter and Uranus are conjunct at 1 and 5 degrees. I'll show you how a conjunction works. So here is that chart that we had. Planetary aspect meanings 0 degrees or 6 degrees, so very close together as they were, are conjunction, and that's the symbol for it. Planets in conjunction work together, intensify each other, and are positive when planets are in harmony. Now, so they can be positive or they can be negative. In this situation, we can see them here, but we can see the red lines making like half a table there, like a triangle. So it's in a harsh position. It's actually at the apex of Chiron and Jupiter and Uranus. They're all squaring each other. So these aren't in a great position. But that's what the aspect is. It's a conjunction, and I'm going to read now what Mercury conjunct Venus is in this book that I've got here. So from what I know with Mercury and Venus, it shows that in early childhood that she was exposed to any type of conversation that was going on. Now, this book says the childhood environment of this person includes open communication. The family talks about whatever it wants. Although the words may not be intellectual, the child is exposed to this conversation nonetheless. This may produce a wordy child and consequently a wordy adult. That's definitely the case. It may be a person who talks too much about nothing, or it may indicate a prolific writer. She could have done a few different things, but she just talked about nothing, I think. Venus suggests the type of effect the mother has on a child's psyche. When the conjunction is afflicted by another planet, which it is, it's afflicted by Uranus, it may be determined how the person is hampered by the mother's influence. This individual will enjoy using the senses and some form of art, blah blah blah, or in related to the sign or the house that it's in. Well, the sign is Virgo, and that's the art of criticism. So basically she's had communicative influence from her mother and really heavy issues with fathers and stepfathers. So it seems to me like mum didn't really do anything to help maybe what was going on in her life. But I suppose maybe we'll find that out later on down the track as we find out more about her. Okay, so the next conjunction we're going to look at is Pluto and Saturn, which is the one we're going through right now, but in Capricorn. So it's a heavy, heavy conjunction. Again, it's the same meanings I showed before. The conjunction is two planets working together. So let's see how this conjunction works out, remembering it's in a square to that very angry Mars. So keep that in mind. Saturn and Pluto conjunctions. Saturn represents the influence of the father on the individual's psyche, the caution point in the consciousness, the teacher or tester. Pluto represents unconscious motivation. The conjunction indicates a person born into a generation when people unconsciously take the law into their own hands. Rationally, they may say that the law is wonderful, but personally one hears them talking about how one must do something. Free will may be discussed intellectually, but in actuality they subconsciously feel that they should be the lawmakers. The father's influence on these individuals was most probably manipulative. It may be difficult for them to just see how they are influenced by the father, which makes sense. The aspect indicates people who may think their urges towards traditional concepts are conscious, but who may be motivated to react to life experience on an unconscious level. In different signs, they express themselves differently. In Libra, this is especially so. It's a lawmaker unto herself. If it doesn't go her way, she'll make the law her way. Subconsciously, they are more apt to respond to criticism or innuendos because Pluto and Saturn are there, and it unconsciously reminds them of the criticism they felt from Dad when they were small. They may find themselves being uncommonly critical of others, as it is their entire generation. Actually, that's Virgo, that's not Libra. They're wrong in this book there. Libra is more of the lawmakers, not the critical generation. But this aspect becomes very important when tied into the personal planets. So that is, in this respect, Mars is a personal planet. It's tied in very closely with that anger. So there's anger towards the father, men in general, and then rage that can't be controlled. She's a lawmaker unto herself, and that actually is represented over here as well with Jupiter, which is the law, and Uranus, which is the rebel. She will do what she wants to do in order to make sure her life is the way that she wants it to be. And whether that's because of her past, her father, her mother, or whatever, her entire family, which seems like the whole thing was a problem, there's still no need to do what she did, of course. So irrespective of what we see in this chart and how deep we dive into it, it doesn't make up for the fact that she did what she did. So she's used every single aspect and placement in her chart in the most negative way. She hasn't learnt any type of lesson from childhood, whether that be she hasn't wanted to, or wasn't given any help, or just went from man to man to man. I'm not 100% sure, but she's emulating what she knows and what she's seen, and she feels as though she should have been treated a whole lot better by Al. Jealousy kicked in, and then Gannon, who's a boy, so the male issue that she has, compounded everything. He got in the way. He was the problem. He was the son of the lady that she was pissed off at. He was the son of the man that she wanted for herself. He had to go.